Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, non binary people, and the like. My name is Is Jones, director of the Watershed reading series with Art Lit Lab, and it is my grand pleasure to introduce to you our three readers in our last reading of 2020. Timothy Prolific Edwards Jonte is a poet, writer, educator, genealogist, designer, healer, organizer who synthesizes ancestral traditions and hip hop culture as well as Afro-Indigenous folklore praxis. Pearl was a Gregorio Fellow at the New School and is a graduate fellow with the Watering Hole. Prolific has published 3 books of poetry, including Prolific, Mosaic, 40 Days and Nights, and synthesized their genealogy spirit in spiritual practice to author their latest book, Ofrenda para las Ancestras. Donald Platz is the author of 7 volumes of poetry. His most recent book, One Illuminated Letter of Being, which will be published by Red Hen Press, August 30th of 2020. His other books include Man Praying, Tornado-esque, Dirt Angels, and others. His poems have appeared in the American Poetry Review, Poetry, the Paris Review, Nation, Kenyan Review, Southwest Review, and elsewhere. He is the recipient of 2 fellowships from the National Endowment of the Arts and 3 Pushcart Prizes. He teaches in the MFA program at Purdue University. Leila Shetty is a Tunisian American poet and author of Deluge with Copper Canyon Press, as well as the chapbooks Ebb and Tunisia Americia, the 2017 editor's selection from Bull City Press. She's a recipient of numerous scholarships, grants, and fellowships from Tin House Writers Workshop, the Frost Place, Key Literary West Seminar, the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund, the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing, and the Cleveland State University recipient, where she was the inaugural Ansel Field Wolf Fellow in Publishing and Writing. Her poems have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Plowshares, Tin House, American Poetry Review, and elsewhere. Please stay at the end of the reading for a brief Q&A with the writers.
Good evening. Timothy Prolific at Wajante. I'm excited to share some work with you tonight. Most of what I'll be sharing is from an upcoming collection called The Dead Speak, as well as some oldies from my book Ofrenda from last year. These are poems that are at the intersection of my genealogical practice, my creative practice, and my spiritual practice. And tonight is the new moon. I'm setting a lot of intentions of really what I want to see moving forward. And a large part of that is to be in community with other artists. So I'm really grateful to Art Lit Lab and Isiola Jones for the invitation and to get to review with Don and Leila. I'm really looking forward to hearing your work later on as well. So up first is The Dead Speak, or Egungun, or Las Muertas Hablan. I awake at 4 a.m., taunted by the dead. They are irreverent. We are spoiled. We believe death is the final destination. Nothing is final, not even a goodbye. Memories do not fade. They are held captive in the body. They even relive in dementia. Some limb moves without prompting. A nerve twitches, the product of past juju. We offer to the dead and they teach us. We offer to the dead and they protect us. We steal from the dead. We gentrify their resting places. They punish us. We wonder why Trump happened. They punish us. Ask the Canarsie. Ask the Matinecock. Matter cannot be created nor destroyed. Therefore, extinction does not exist. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Every revolution has a counter-revolution. The dead are rising in our veins to reclaim what was stolen. The dead are rising in our veins to purify what was tainted. The dead are rising in our veins to remember what was erased. We remain, embodiment of their dreams. We remain, descendants of justice. We remain, we thermodynamic. We create life. Bloodletting, a blues in 3 parts, abridged. White folks hear the blues come out but don't know where it comes from. Ma Rainey. The blues, the sound of bale combined with bale. Chains clamoring in lungs as we exhale makes notes blue. Imano Emiri Baraka said, we a blues people, us, in this diaspora, Us who be drumming and humming is transatlantic meditations to revisit cousins. Sure, we can't see their faces in the music, but the point of the blues is the point of faith, the evidence of things not seen, but felt. We close our eyes when we hear it. Spirit. Every time I hear the crack of the whip, my blood runs cold. Maybe they hear heritage in the lash, the letting of leather, the splitting and spitting of tissue. The blues is a choked wail, a hidden tear, a pride suppressed, a cough pressed into the flesh of skin and bow of arm. How is it that our pain is for sale? What is the cost of creating the first American art form? What is the auction price? Who be bidding? Who be doing the bidding? And what coattailed Uncle Toms are cool with the sale? Our pain isn't for sale. It is colonized and commodified like a pumpkin spice artisanal Jesus, you know. The motherfucker who moved in with Starbucks cup and scabbed hand until Coquito Jesus the salsa was too loud on Graham Avenue. The blues, a song for the Yamaya imprisoned in the Starbucks logo, tail pinned over a forced smile like a trophy in Teddy Roosevelt's living room. The blues, a 16-bar verse scribbled on a compostable napkin, placed in his lapel as Black Frohawk Jesus enters the African Methodist Episcopal Church. The blues, ancestral spirit, mother of the waters, the notes of women whose hands healed wounds with whispers, tears turned rivers by men who hang from trees by the strings of their guitars. The blues, whose fruit fed churches and breakbeats, the sound of a language reclaimed in name, reclaimed in distorted memory, reclaimed in offering, reclaimed as liberation. This poem is for my great-great-grandmother, Minnie Biddle, and my great-grandmother, Laura Biddle Francis. 92 Harbor Road. Tonight, we cast spells. We make delicious what others dismiss. There is value, creativity embedded in our sweat. We strain nuances and nuisances into rainbows. Daughter, this is how you raise family. Find plants mirroring the color of the sun. Bring yeast, sugar, water, lemons, oranges. Let them play in a house your husband built, colliding as they boil. Then give them air. Let them ferment, sweetened by proximity. Let them discuss undulations of the sun. For hours, days, check on them. Don't let them become bitter reflections of neglect, strained by the purpose of another. And for my last poem, it's a poem that I wrote in front of my spiritual space during the Watering Hole Writers Retreat, which is a large, creative, generative space for me. A lot of the poems that I've shared tonight were written within that space, so I'm grateful to them. And the name of the poem is The Apocalypse as Seen Where the Waters Meet on the Summer Solstice. Water no get enemy. If water kill your child, what are you going to use? Fela Kuti. Apocalypse, an unveiling, a revelation. We dance, clockwise on the mound. Wind, dampening locks, curls and wampum dangling from limbs and leather. Sage, cedar, eucalyptus smudge the children of wind and water as we dance upon the back of the great turtle. We salute the four directions, make plain our petition for the end. The clear one seed, the tide rise, barrel toward us laughing. They fear the water, wind, earth, and fire. Water, wind, earth, and fire are our grandmothers. We, their children, dance clockwise on the mound, direct the grandmothers down the inlet, past the dirt roads, smoke shops, gas stations to the estates, coal plants, yacht clubs, country clubs, county executive offices that let our peninsula flood, that let our reservation flood. We, their children, watch the grandmothers grind concrete, marble, stained glass steeples, Maybachs, and Bikram yoga mats into a fist soaked with flame, whose fingers unfurl and tear the feathers out of the orange toupee sitting on a bald scavenger. We, their children, feel the heat and water splash our faces. The gravel and debris churn midair, scratching our bodies. This cycle dies. The water rises aflame, a mound of reparation, come to collect that bounce check. We celebrate with black and milds and red solo cups full of Hennessy. Thank you.
That was so wonderful, Timothy. That last poem, very searing and scathing. Um, Thank you very much. Um, hey, too, I was just wondering, is there a reference to Freeman Vines in one of those poems? His hanging guitars, or am I just making that up? Do you know that this artist? No? Yeah, yeah. Um, okay. Um, Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much to I.S. Jones of the Watershed Reading Series and the Art Lib Lab for organizing the reading tonight. I'm deeply honored to be reading with such distinguished poets and activists and healers as Timothy Prolific Edwajante and Leila Shetty. I'm going to read 3 poems from this new book called One Illuminated Letter of Being. It describes the dying and death of my 96-year-old mom and the year of grieving after it. I just want to say that a lot of your poems, especially that first poem, Timothy, sort of speaks to some of that spirit, I guess, of the poems I'm going to read. I've just jotted down a couple of your lines. Memories held captive in the body, and then the dead are rising in our veins. So I think that's sort of, you'll hear some of these poems will be sort of in that spirit, if you will. We'll start with a poem in which I traveled to visit my mom a week or so before her death. It's called Cloud Hands. Your mother has been waiting for you all day, says the charge nurse on the 3rd floor rehab unit called Whispering Pines, where they've stashed Mom until the deluxe private hospice care room is ready, i.e. its most recent occupant is dead. A sign suspended from the ceiling points the other way to Harmony Lane, locked room for the demented. 1 floor below us, Hummingbird Hill houses the benignly senile. The signs are new since my father's time here 8 years ago. Taking the elevator, which still runs slow, I breathed in the familiar odors of urine, disinfectant, meatloaf. I had time to read the calendar posted on the elevator wall. Tuesday, August 5th. In the news, coffee, exercise, quiz, sensory games, trivia, Catholic communion, bingo, lunch, root beer float social on the patio, sing-along, life's stories with Megan, dinner. I do not think that there are many root beer floats in my mother's future. I turn the corner and enter her room, magic number 333. It must mean something in the book of Revelation, but if I ever knew it, I forget. My mother's sleeping. Stick figure a child might draw. Her chest heaves up and down. She shrugs her shoulders with every breath. Dying makes her go fetal, curl into herself like the spider I once kept in a glass jar, but forgot to feed with flies. She's dreaming, whispering to herself. I bend close to hear. I remember who you are. Everybody stiffened up. Didn't know who would be supported. I sit down in a chair opposite her hospital bed. Her veined eyelids flutter open. I wave at her. She smiles. I kiss her gently on both cadaverous cheeks. I'm so glad you're here. What took so long? I explain the flight delays and how, waiting for the shuttle to thrifty car rental, I got talking with a Holiday Inn van driver. His business was slow. He offered to take me to Thrifty, but when we got there, the windows were boarded up. We drove around the airport for half an hour, but never found it. Eventually, he had to take me back to the shuttle stop. I tipped him for his time. Eventually, the Thrifty van arrived. Their new location turned out to be next to the New York State House of Corrections. Mom and I both laugh. Everything is juxtaposition. A passing nurse looks in and says, I see your boyfriend's here. Mom shows me how she uses the red metal triangle that dangles by a chain from a metal arm over her bed to pull herself upright. She can hardly do it. The triangle reminds me of the mobiles I once suspended over our daughters' cribs for them to smile at, reach for, and bat about. Finally, my mother and I run out of things to say. I hold her cold, thin, knobby-knuckled, big-veined, bruised, liver-spotted, bony cloud hands. It's good of you to come, she says. Suddenly, salt tears, the saltiest tears I've ever tasted, well up. They burn my eyes. I can no longer see her. And now a poem after my mom's death. It's called Muzak. Back home in Indiana, I watched two white butterflies flutter, light, and rest, flutter, flit, and light upon the dark green leaves of broccoli, kale, and red-ribbed Swiss chard growing from the brown dirt of our raised bed. Lucy, our younger daughter, at 5 years old, once got a white glitter butterfly painted on her face by a clown weeping 6 orange tears, still smiling his large purple grin at the state fair. She never wanted to wash that butterfly off. In the same way, but even more indelibly than any tattoo, my dead mother stays with me. Her death certificate says that she died of lung cancer, that coronary artery disease contributed to her death. I keep talking to her. As always, I tell her what we've been doing. 2 days ago, Lucy and I drove 480 miles. We drove through a rainstorm. It rained so hard we could barely see. Lucy had to slow down to 20 miles per hour. The rain stopped. We drove into the mountains. We drove through low-lying cumulonimbus remnants of the storm. I had never driven through clouds before. Lucy said it was like flying. In the plains, we saw a semi lose a tire. First, there was a dusty puff of smoke. Then the tire blew and shreds of tread flew past us onto the gravel shoulder. The truck pulled over. Mother, you are the clouds we drove through. You are the blown tire that could have hurt us but didn't. You are everywhere around me. Yesterday morning, I parted the motel drapes and walked onto a balcony, into sunlight, into another day, into Muzak. A trumpet riff with a few bongos for backup, airsats jazz blaring from some hidden outdoor speaker. I walked smack into the red-pink cloud of blossoms floating up from a crepe myrtle rooted in dirt. I touched the frilly clusters of small flowers with yellow anthers at their center. Wind made the tree heave. I counted 7 hawks, black specks riding the updraft. A woman with a towel walked by on her way to the pool. The day had the humid smell of heaven, of blossom and wet soil. And now I'm just doing the chronological thing here, you know. The book is really very linear as far as time goes. And here's a poem 7 months out after my mom's death. Death and Crocuses. Ben Franklin's old joke. In this world, nothing is certain except death and taxes. He wrote his bon mot in French in a letter to his friend Jean-Baptiste Leroy, a physicist during the first days of the French Revolution. He asked, "Are you still living, or has the mob of Paris mistaken the head of a monopolizer of knowledge for a monopolizer of corn and paraded it about the streets upon a pole?" death and taxes and crocuses. Green shoots grope up through black soil on the sunny east side of our neighbor's house. Hard buds explode into sparklers held in the hands of children who wave them ecstatically. Spring's parade is coming down the icy street. I hear its brass band blare, though I don't see yet the slide trombones of daffodils flash in the sun in unison. 2 days ago, a German Airbus's co-pilot locked the pilot out of the cockpit and crashed the plane into a French Alp. All 148 passengers were killed on impact. Death and body parts debris and body parts lie scattered over a 1/4-kilometer radius. Lord, remember your people and have mercy upon us. God, if you exist, and if so, whether you are in the least kindly disposed toward us, I do not know. I enter my doubt on the debit side of the day's ledger. On the credit side, crocuses. Lord God, how frail and foolish are your first flowers. They jackhammer up through dirt that keeps thawing, then freezing. They stand undismayed by the desultory snow. They do not bow their gay and gaudy heads to hail that rails against the turning of the zodiac and beats upon our back deck its dum-dums drum solo. They open lavender with orange anthers or yellow as noon sun. They make me blink. I see my mother in her lavender polyester pantsuit and matching felt hat. She carries a white pleather purse and wears white sandals over supposed stockings. Mom, I don't suppose you will return or be reborn. The lavender crocuses come back every year to tell us winter's almost finished. You can't, you won't. You climb into your little red car, the Yaris, and drive away. You wave goodbye with one brief wave, your hand a windshield wiper wiping clean of rain the glass between us. Okay, so that's all from this new book. I want to read another poem tonight. As you all know, the number of COVID-19 cases is rising sharply in this country and worldwide. The past few days, there have been more than 110,000 new cases per day in the US. So I thought I'd end on this particular poem. Under a wave off Kanagawa. All through the first month of the COVID-19 quarantine, 13-year-old Liesel, her mother, Roseanne, and I have been working on a 1,000-piece puzzle of Hokusai's The Great Wave off Kanagawa to pass the time. We're assembling the jigsaw upside down on the coffee table Roseanne grew up with. Slab of sandy-colored rust-veined marble mounted on a 4-legged frame of cherry. Every time we fit a piece into the puzzle, we ring a brass bell to celebrate. It is a hard jigsaw because there are so few colors. 3 shades of blue for the gigantic rogue wave that curls and crests over 3 gray fishing boats, pointy-prowed and slim, each manned by 8 tiny, bald oarsmen in blue coats. Yellow sky, snow-capped Mount Fuji in the misty distance, framed by the wave. In the US, the death toll has risen past 85,000, with more than 1.5 million confirmed cases of COVID-19. Healthcare workers are dying. Workers in meatpacking plants are dying. Bus drivers are dying, people in nursing homes, people with liver, kidney, or lung conditions, people with diabetes or hypertension, the elderly. Checkout clerks in groceries, African Americans, Latinx, Indigenous Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Muslims, Catholics, Sufis, auto factory workers in Detroit, Uber drivers in San Francisco, accountants in Cincinnati, the homeless in New York City. COVID-19 is killing everyone equally, democratically, except less for those under 30, except less for those who can afford to hide from it. We shelter in place. I listen to the news on the radio. The great wave off Kanagawa breaks over us. Our flimsy boats with their cargo of live fish are no match for the Bay of Edo's typhoons, for this offshore wave that towers 40 feet above us. Foam from the wave's descending crest forms claws that reach out towards us. Cumulonimbus clouds echo the spiraling shape of the wave. They are its white shadow. I stare at the puzzle for hours, cannot find a single piece that fits, that might help complete this picture. Liesel puts piece after piece in place, continually rings the bell that tells us we are all about to drown. But not she. Mount Fuji's small isosceles triangle, the only unchanging thing, points upwards while the wave comes crashing down. Hokusai signed this moment of apocalypse from 1833 in the upper left-hand corner of sky. To me, who never learned Japanese or kanji, the characters are completely unintelligible. They could be God's signature on this unfinished 1,000-piece world. They could be the script of Black Sea Rack tossed up after storms along a high tide line. Or the canticle, scroll of Torah, a screaming seagull's webbed feet scrawl on yellow sand that the next crash of surf shall wash back to oblivion's blackboard. Thank you all, and I'll turn it over now to Leila there.
Thank you. That was so wonderful. It's sad to say wonderful for a poem about something that's still so horrifying. But you did such a wonderful poem, and I'm just thinking of the puzzle. I've been trying to do a puzzle that's much less complicated, and have not been doing as well. Thank you both, and thank you, Art Lit Lab. I'm very excited to be joining you all. Yeah, I think I'm just going to jump right in. So I'm going to be reading from my new book, Deluge. It looks like this. I'm going to start off with the first poem, which is called Confession. And there's an epigraph from when Mary is giving birth to Jesus in the Quran. She says, "Oh, I wish I had died before this and was in oblivion, forgotten. Truth be told, I like Mary a little better when I imagine her like this, crouched and cursing, a boy God pushing on her cervix. I like remembering she had a cervix, her body ordinary and so like mine. Girl sweat lacing rivulets like veins in the sand, her small hands on her knees, not doves, but hands, gripping, a palm pressed to her spine, bronze whispering voyeurs overhead. Oh, Mary, like a god, I too take pleasure in knowing you were not all holy, that ache could undo you like a knot. And suffering, I admire this girl who cared for a moment not about God or his plans, but her own distinct life. This fiercer Mary who'd disappear if it saved her, who'd howl to hell with salvation if it meant this pain, the blessed adolescent who squatted indignant in a desert, bearing his child like a secret she never wanted to hear. Intake form. Doubled for 6 hours and bleeding, I decide to go to the hospital only when my boyfriend says, "How long? Jesus Christ," then puts me in the car, drives to the hospital. Rate your pain from 0 to 10, 0 being impossible, the impassible God, 10 being Christ pinned like a monarch, who was unlike all others wounded, who did not die to save you in your version of the story, who endured the suffering of the world and everyone in it, and never once asked to go to the hospital. 7 pains, or the pain sevenfold. Pain like the pain of the Blessed Mother in the desert, of the first mother who passed it on like an inheritance, of my mother, her first, on her back, wailing in this hospital. How much blood would you say? What's your best estimate, would you say? Would you say it comes constant or in waves? You stayed in the tub, did you say? Did it soak a tampon, did you say? How many tampons would you say? How quickly would you say? Is this abnormal, would you say? Is this a lot of blood for you, would you say? Is there any chance you're pregnant, would you say? Is it possible this is your period, would you say? When was your last period, would you say? Say, is that your boyfriend? I'm going to ask him some questions, okay? I'm just going to ask him some questions about your bleeding, okay? Just clear some things up, okay? Get a clear picture, okay? Then we'll get you into the hospital. In the 22nd year of my life, in the 12th month, on the 15th day of the month, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. And I caught heaven in a plastic bag, heaven teeming steadily into a bag beneath my jeans, and, God forgive me, I think mulberries. And an angel speaks the measured anodinic language of angels directly to my vein. And I bob in and out of what divulges no horizon, a voice above pronouncing flood, and me affirming, yes, a flood. And so one day, I'll say it was. The word came down to me so simply that first day of the spate of the hospital. This is Sylvia. Okay. Mary speaks. And what could I say when he entered, rude as a dream, bare flame of a man with wings and demands not his own? I'd been raised a good girl, to house my tongue in my mouth, to be hospitable towards strangers, suspicious of no one. Perhaps I'd have been better off to be wary, but I'd been waiting so long to hear God speak, I hadn't thought to think of what he might tell me. Sarcoma. When the doctor says the word sarcoma, I consider how it might be a nice name for a daughter, that good feminine A, the way parents name their children for all sorts of inappropriate things. Apples, for instance, or the place where the baby was conceived. And I trace my fingers over the barrel of my belly as he speaks, flesh distended beneath the blue tissue I wear for a dress, an ideal grief frock, throwaway. And he says something about life expectancy, but of course I expect my life. So plain I thought nothing would ever take it. And while he explains, I cut my palms around my center, as if comforting a child, or covering her ears. Litany while reading scripture in the gynecologic oncology waiting room. And God said, let there be blood. And God said, flood. And God said, good is a woman with fruit in her womb and not in her hand. And God said, sin. And God did not say, forgive. God said, I will make a stormy wind. And God said, sun, a breath stirring. And God said, highly favored. And God said, condemned. And God said, I will blot out man whom I have created, for I am sorry that I have made them. And God said, listen, and sank a boy in her like a stone. Tumor. On the scan, a monochrome nimbus of indiscernible material. My own, of course, but its intentions opaque, its mouth not a mouth, but a zero, a cipher, a space indicating a question it will not ask of itself. It requires me, like a child, to do another thing I'd rather not, to speak on its behalf, to determine its name so I might call it by it, so I might be accurate in my address. This precise knowing, something like tenderness, my obsessive attention and ersatz love, and I cannot turn away from it. Unblinking oculus of my center, blink eye staring from benthic depths, and while I'm at it, it resembles too, I think, a fruit if fruit were buried, a chthonic pomegranate, Pompeian fig cocoon, or else the dark countenance of the moon, one of its seas, or the orphan planet of the dead, motherless stone, God of no and never. Angel. After a month of asking, suddenly a voice. It says, you deserve that which has happened to you. It says, I see what you do with your long, terrene hands. Maundering through the banalities of my life, it follows, speaking, as if from a frosty bag of peas in the freezer aisle, speaking while I am on my knees, scrubbing the bathroom floor, trying to love a man. Its speech is disquieting company, but company nonetheless. The TV left on and turned low. It desperately wants my attention, but is polite, which is its defining weakness. Sometimes I catch it stirring out of the corner of my eye, a glint at the end of my cat's whiskers, a spangle on the ceiling of indiscernible source. More often, though, it looks like me, only a little off, like my reflection in the pregnant belly of a spoon. In fact, when I speak to it, I use my own name. I'm not sure if it minds. It repeats instead its refrain. It says, God has plans for you. It says, I didn't say they were good. Hymen. Second blood. I never knew you. After the first, scoured the bed for your blazoned blot and came up empty. Perhaps I was born without you. A box with no prize inside, a sundae with no cherry on top. God of good girls, God of matrimony, mother state, which I consider a distant country with a discordant tongue, did you speak with God and conclude I hadn't use for you? Once I was small as your kin, so small and for such a long time. Longer than I've lived, I fit inside my mother when she fit inside her mother, and so on and so forth, and further, a nest of matrons, me's and a beam in which to be female is to be something like infinity, and was it determined then what kind of woman I would be? It seems I've always been frightened, little veil, of wedlock's lock clicking shut. The heritable procession of women whispering in the aisle of my pulse. Don't do, don't do, don't. And I haven't done. This the gravamen, the grave I've dug with the spade of pleasure. But wanting seal of want, I did choose to commit my life's greatest transgression with a benevolent accomplice, and so in the here before you could say I am among the spared. What a mess this messlessness of you could have been in any number of lives my size, billowing specters of dresses and a line of possibility. Lives in which I am the bridesmaid and you, maidenhead, the bride given away, where I am the acquired property and you the red ribbon severed in the threshold, I the purse and you the coin tendered. Perhaps no one ever told you, precious emblem of innocence, simulacrum for honor, that some believe you the most important part of me, vital. Like a heart, a man gets the thrill of bursting where he can see it, that blood is owed to him. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? Of a woman, you, the only blood worth anything. I think I'm going to skip ahead just a little. Checking time. Okay. I think just two more. Questions directed toward the idea of Mary. Was it the voice you feared or its shadow? Did you long for his touch, or was suffering enough for you to know he was there? Do you resent me, my juvenile hungers? Do you wish for me the freedom of a vast barren plain? What would you have done with your body if your body obliged? Did it please you, your sun risen at the end like a question? Do you pity the angels, their ancillary lives? Did your worship falter once you were sure you were good? How long did you live before yielding to your inevitable shame? And how long before you realized? Did you realize? Shame was a blade you turned against yourself, and once you knew it, you could use it. Exegesis. I bled. God didn't want to hear about it. He said unclean, and so it was. He said it is harm, and so it was. Want to hear about it? He said unclean. Once a woman wanted, so he did her harm. And so it was first conceived, a woman suffering because a woman wanted. So he said cursed, and then he said blessed. The woman chose to suffer, conceived a God, though she never knew a man. And God knows best. If he calls a curse a blessing, then so it is. And he said she was clean. She never knew a man. I've known men, but never a God that bled and lived. But I did. Thank you.
That was incredible, everyone. Thank you so much. If you're sitting at home from the comfort of your couch, please give another round of applause for our fantastic readers. Um, so now, as we hop into the Q&A, I usually get the Q&A started, and then we'll see if there are comments in the comment section, if we'll see there are questions there. So first, I wanted to start with you, Donald. I'm really fascinated by the way that your poems negotiate death. Your mother, at least the poems that we heard tonight, your mother seems to have been gone for some time. She passed away, unfortunately, from cancer. But the movement of the poems manipulates time in a way that it feels as though your mother is reanimated again and again throughout your poems. Does the speaker of your poems eventually arrive at a place of peace in which you put her down, or is there a way in which your mother finds, I guess, a new transmutation of life, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for it. You know, you're right. I mean, there's this kind of thing where mm, my mom kind of is, after her death, is always there with me, the poet, the speaker, with the poems. The poems seem kind of, what should I say, enmeshed with her, in her presence with her. And it's, yeah, and there's kind of this kind of almost, put it this way, as you know, like the great the great, wonderful gay poet Lorca talked about duende and that sort of wrestling with death, of course, with the, sort of the black music, he called it, of course. So I think the book is full of that, actually. And so your question, though, is there any like peace or something, resolution to that? I think, it's kind of interesting. Let me just tell you a little story about the manuscript itself. It was accepted eventually by something called Red Mountain Press. And the editor there is Susan Gardner. And she said, kind of like, she asked me this question, the poem seems so close to death, all the way through. And she said, and then she asked me your question, basically, is there any resolution? And, and she said, I didn't get that from the manuscript, and then she said, why don't you try to, it's up to you, of course, but why don't you try to write a poem from your perspective now and see where you are with it, basically, and I really liked her thought. Because I think she was right. So I wrote actually 3 poems after my mom died in 2014, and I was writing this book basically from 2014 through 2016. So a 2-year period of doing, actually drafting, doing first drafts on the poems. So the deal was that this year in 2020, I returned and I wrote 2 poems at the end. 1 poem to start the book, and then sort of as a preface, a prologue, and then 2 at the end. The last poem in the book is called Recipe for a Rice House, and it's a very kind of a surreal poem. And I think it does actually turn to the mother and transform her so she is a different kind of presence. Let me just read, I'll just read you the last little bit. This is the she here is my mom. She lives in the cramped rice house whose walls I devoured because I got hungry and couldn't wait to eat before I woke up. Now she is released and floats free from that burned house, up toward the sun's greater conflagration, sky cauldron boiling over. She becomes one with that fire. It cannot consume her. And so there's this kind of thing where she actually changes, and there's a whole different kind of relationship, I think, that I have with her. It's both more distant, but also she's very present. And there's a sense that, and this goes back actually to that line I jotted down from you, Timothy. And that line being, hold on, the dead are rising, memories held captive in the body, the dead are rising in our veins. There's a sense here that I, the poet, my mom won't leave me, no. But she is distant now. She is more distant than in the poems. So yeah, there is this kind of thing where I think there is a change at the very, very end. Sort of sorry about the long-winded answer.
No, it's fine. Thank you. Thank you. It's a really good, rich answer. My next question is for you, Leila. So your book has had enough time to live out in the world, has been picked up by what I understand to be its target audience, which is young women, maybe young women who also have a history with unstable or fraught physical health, as well as young women who are governed by faith and shame. Also, as a side note, one of my students, I won't mention her name, but she was really excited to receive your work. And she had said that, the best kind of poems are spiritual poems because poems are inherently spiritual beings, right? Which I thought was really apt for poetry in general, but also your work specifically. I'm curious about how the reception of your book has been since it's been out in the world. And have you had any moments that surprised you with the way that people reacted towards you or towards Deluge?
It's a great question. Yeah, it's so weird to realize, like I was thinking about the other day, I'm like, wow, yeah, this has all been this year. It's been a long, strange year. I feel immensely lucky for the people that this book has brought into my life. Even, across all these distances, because it was released during the pandemic. And so I have I guess I had a couple last minute, readings right before everything broke out. But mostly this has been, a virtual experience with this book, my first book. But it's still, I've had really wonderful Zoom readings like this one, where I get to meet and talk to people. I've been able to visit a lot of classes, which has been really great, because now I can just sort of pop into anyone's laptop from afar. So I've been really interested to have those conversations, and it feels really rewarding. Just I guess when I was writing this book, I certainly was writing it for myself, and then I thought the same thing, that maybe like other Muslim or Arab women would find it particularly resonant, or women who had experienced illness, especially kind of gendered illness that's not taken seriously or dismissed. And that's been wonderful to feel in community, and after an experience that was so isolating, and to know, there is like a strength in numbers, and just feels like, yes, I wanted this book to mean something to someone else, and it's very heartening to know that it does. But I guess I've been really surprised by how many people outside of that, that kind of specific circle of people that I thought it would reach. It's reached. I really thought when writing the book that it would have a narrow audience, because I guess I had fears about like a female book. People don't really like to talk about menstruation. People don't like to talk about uteruses, and they don't really like to talk about shame, and not really God either, I think. At least not God in a way that is, I think, still fearful a little bit, like not in like a skeptical way, but a God-fearing conversation, I think, is not always one that's like in vogue. So I was just very surprised by the people it's reached, and it just teaches me all the time, I guess, that no matter our specific details of our suffering and spirituality and all these things, we have so much in common. So it's been a real blessing. I don't know what this year would have been like for me if I didn't also have this book coming into the world, because it's just been such a link for me in a very lonely time. So I'm very grateful for everything it's done.
This is a question for everybody here. I'm curious. Question came in. What are your what recent works? When I say works, I mean books, movies, maybe plays, music, mediums that maybe tangentially related to your work, but also art forms that are outside of your work. How have those influenced your work as of late, especially when we're thinking about how it's often difficult to produce work during a time like this pandemic, when we're thinking about the country as a whole, but also our interior lives?
So I am like also a part of a really vigorous neo-folkloric dance company called Ashe Dance Theater Collective. And the poem that I opened with, I read during a Dia de los Muertos installation at Brooklyn Children's Museum this year. And the choreographer, the leader of Ashe Dance Theater Collective, Adia Whitaker, is somebody whose work during great times has always impacted me. But also like navigating the loss of all of my grandparents, all the poems that I shared tonight have been written in like that vacancy within my life. And I wouldn't say they're trying to necessarily fill that void, but they're trying to make sense of it. And working with Adia, because her work is so steeped in African traditional religions, has allowed me to be able to like utilize like dance and movement, whether I'm participating like in the actual movement or standing to the side and providing poetry in terms of accompaniment, as a methodology for healing. So like a lot of the people whose work that I'm really drawn to right now are people who are instructing how to move through trauma rather than to sit with it. And I think that during this period of time of like compounded trauma and pandemic, I mean, living within this country is already very much a traumatic experience, especially given the recent political climate. But for BIPOC people, that's just what it is. This idea that you can literally generate your own healing through the movement of your body, and even writing is a movement practice. And there are times that, like, my dancer friends will remind me that if I have not gotten up and danced, that I am still moving whenever I pick up my pen. So to know that it can feel difficult to create during these times, but I also feel like it feels more difficult to be still in a way that is paralysis. My cousin once told me that the first victory every day, particularly if you're battling depression, is to be able to get out of bed. The second victory is to let the water hit you. And I think about that of like, okay, well, if those are my first two victories, then how else can I move to be able to generate joy for myself in my daily practice, even when everything in the world feels that it's crumbling?
I've been reaching for form a lot recently. I'm currently working on a project that's entirely in form. Um, and I think I like structure. I think that structure is what I need right now. I went for most of the year and most of last year, actually, not really writing anything. And then I started a PhD, and now I have to write things. And that's also some of that structure. I think that structure is also contributing to me reading, because before that, in the early months of spring and summer, I couldn't focus on anything for more than a couple minutes. So I was watching a lot of really bad reality TV and kind of just floating around in a strange stupor. Um, and now I have to read and I have to write. So it's been a blessing to have that forced upon me. And so I don't know, I've been reading all sorts of things. I'm really interested though in wordplay at the moment. So I recently read Jill S. Baum's Woodland, which is like a really riotous, like beautiful book. There's so much sound that goes on in that book, a lot of puns, quite funny. But it's about, sad things. So I think that book for me was exactly what I wanted to read and needed to read right now, because it's playing with language, but it's engaging with something that's painful. And so that's been what's really helped me is just games, because I think, whenever I'm too far in one direction, I have to bring some light in to, balance it out. And it's been quite a heavy year for me. And for everyone. So I've been really, I'm not usually, I think, my work doesn't seem particularly playful. So it really is a gesture into a new direction, but I think it's something that I need right now. So I'm following that impulse. So a lot of games.
Yeah, so for me, one of the things that I find very, as far as another outside art form, really, that I find very moving and inspiring is visual arts of all sorts, really. So, I mean, this is like kind of a long-standing thing for me. I love to do that thing that people in doctoral programs like call ekphrasis, so that hokusai poem, the jigsaw poem, that's really an ekphrastic poem, essentially. So that kind of gets me moving, basically. I don't know, I love looking at things. I just find it very stimulating. So that's what I do a lot, honestly. So, behind me, there's this picture we were talking about before we could get on the program. It's this weird kind of surreal, kind of like Van Gogh. Someone, it's a Maltese artist in Malta. Anyway, I get stimulated by that. So that's kind of the way I work. It has been a really hard and troubling year politically here. So I guess I've just been trying to deal with it by writing poems about relationship, basically, honestly. And then occasionally, a more political poem. I I think it's very, I mean, as all of you do know, I mean, it's so important to be able to write about our current environment, what's going on in that environment, and to give expression from it, from our particular points and different points of view, you know. So that's one of our jobs, I think, you know, as writers, and it's a difficult job right now. It is.
I couldn't agree more. I had a question for you, Timothy. I'm curious about spiritual practices. Obviously, is at the crux of your work, but I'm curious about the ways in which, in your poems, does your spiritual practice and form ever converge? And if so, what does that look like manifested on the page for you?
Great question. It has, and the so like what I practice is like a form of African traditional religion, and within this practice, there are forces of nature that are called Orisha, and the Orisha who is my protector, who is my guide, is Oya. So I actually created a form to honor her, to honor that divine feminine energy. Her number is 9. Today happens to be her day. Her colors are purple and brown. That is what I am wearing. That is the significance of these choices. And the form is a 9-stanza poem of 3 lines each. When I'm feeling froggy, it is 9 syllables per line. And when I made up the rules, I was like, why did I do that? It's arduous, and it's been rewarding in terms of doing that. So in terms of how it combines with craft is within form, between that and the other form that I'm working on writing. Actually, one of my students did a better version of the other form that I created called the Yeye, which is for Oshun, who was also another Orisha. 5 lines, 5 stanzas. 5 stanzas, 5 lines each stanza, 5 words on each line. To be able to create those particular forms has infused that practice, particularly like if I'm meditating, if I'm near my altar or sacred space. And I was drawn to do those during my healing practice when I was at the watering hole. The first one was created there. The second one was created actually like at the onset of COVID earlier this year. I was trying to figure out how to write 30 poems in 30 days for National Poetry Month during the middle of a pandemic. And form is something that I turn to, and form has not been necessarily my best friend over the years. It's not something I've gravitated toward, although if I look back at it, I've been pretty much always been writing in some level of form, and something I've become honest with myself. But the structure helps, particularly because it gives a container for that spirit to be able to fill. And that's what I'm finding now, that I'm becoming more drawn toward form. But I'm also letting the forms I'm drawn to be informed by my spiritual practice and also numerology. So there's a certain pattern I want to be able to hit, a certain rhythm, a certain vibration, and the number of lines, the number of syllables are able to help contain that energy in terms of expression. Sometimes it happens by itself, but there are the times that I'll write, and during my edit is when I'm working on pushing toward that form to see what happens and what is unlocked when I make that shift from that first draft into the form, and what shifts and changes and what I like or dislike, what I'm challenged by, and to kind of interrogate, well, what is challenging me about this transformation?
That was a wonderful answer. Thank you. I don't have any more questions for you all. I don't know if you have questions for each other by any chance. I don't believe we have any questions in the comment section either. Oh,
I do have some questions for both Timothy and Leila, if you don't mind. I mean, I don't want to, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But so I was reading some poems, you know, just before the reading, of course, here, you know, online and stuff, Leila. And you know, I'm totally struck and moved by, what should I say, the interrogation of the divine that you know get going in your poems. It's beautifully nuanced, I think, you know. Anyway, I was wondering if you could, you know, talk a little bit about that kind of that tension that you know that you've created, and how you create that tension within the poems too. Yeah, kind of open-ended. Anything you want to say about that?
Thank you. I like the idea of interrogating the divine. I grew up very religious. My father is Muslim and my mother is Catholic, and we were raised Muslim, but both faiths were very present. And I always kind of have joked that I got some pretty strict, kind of parent faith. And I think that because I grew up in this, middle area of two intense faiths, and I also was a very spiritual and also spirited child, I was always kind of asking questions, I guess. I went to Sunday school all of my life, all my, child life. And I would always get in trouble for asking questions about, well, why is that? And why do I have to do this? And why did this happen? And, and it was, no one was really supposed to be doing that. I would get in a lot of trouble. The sides were separated into men and women, and I always wanted to go into the men's side because they had a foosball table, and I was very jealous. So I was always trying to figure out, I was like, well, why don't we get that? Why can't I go over there? Why are you not having to do this? And I have to do this other thing. And then when I got older, it became about scripture, asking questions about the stories we were told and the roles of, especially the women and the stories we were told. And I didn't get any answers. Mostly it was sort of, just, kind of be quiet and read, I had this period, I guess, after graduating from high school, a very small window of time, but a little window of time where I sort of veered away from faith. And I, was like, well, no one has any answers for me. And so I don't really have any interest in this. And then I got sick. And so then my faith sort of, really abruptly had to come back into the picture because I was grappling with mortality. And I wanted to know, I felt desperately that I needed God. I felt that I needed his help. And I also felt very angry with God. Why have you done this? I thought that I had done something to deserve it, because that's, I guess, when you're raised in a very intense faith, you sort of think like there is a reason. So I must have done something because it was so gendered. I figured it was a gendered sin that I had committed, a sexual sin. And so I felt this tension between needing someone desperately and also really resenting them for that need. And so I guess the poems really are from that tussle of resentment and need. And Mary kind of filled a really lovely spot for me in terms of, I was like, God doesn't get me, I guess, or something, or I don't get God, but I can understand Mary. Mary, I have a better sense for, and I felt like that's someone I can petition toward, who will probably have my back. Like Mary was always like a figure for me of like mercy and patience and those kind of things. And I was raised with a very kind of fearful God. So God was like the more aggressive, stern force, and Mary was the comforter. And so the book doesn't really resolve that tension. The final poem of it is a really long poem, and it doesn't end on a note of, it goes between I hate you, I love you, and I think that's probably still where I'm at a little bit. But yeah, it comes from genuine questioning. A lot of the poems were written when I was sick and really felt conflicted. But, yeah.
Yeah, the tension comes through really nicely, I think. It's a tension I think well, maybe not everybody feels, but a lot of us do feel, because who is that? Is there a divinity? If there's a divinity, what does that mean? And doesn't all square, put it that way, or it's hard to square everything. And then Timothy, I was wondering, I'm totally fascinated by the formal kinds of thoughts that you're talking about, and I was just wondering. So, do you do a lot of? You're doing syllable count, you were saying, and do you do a lot of that in the poems at this point? Do you? Because I'm very interested actually in syllabics myself. It's something that I like to use a great deal. And so I'm just wondering, kind of, what's your experience of writing in syllabics as opposed to free verse, let's say, whatever that means. Free verse, is it free? Blah blah blah. Which is not We all, like you were saying, right? Some of the things, we're all kind of creating our own forms within free verse, like, oh, like, there's that wonderful poem that you have, Leila, where you're doing an afra. It's free verse, I believe, but it's like, would you say, it's just like devastating, right? That an afra that gets going, in the poem. So anyway, I was just wondering, Timothy, if you could talk a little bit about the experience for you of writing in with syllabics, essentially, what that feels like, I guess, as a practicing artist here.
Doing it intentionally is something new. I've done free verse for the majority of my career. I started in the performance circuit, and as I've moved and become more comfortable with form, part of it is like my fascination with syllables is from hip hop. My favorite MCs do multi-syllabic rhyme, which is really, really difficult. The idea I'm going to have like every single syllable in this word in a 4-syllable word rhyme, and to rhyme that across others as well in words that are compound, words that are not. So I'm always thinking about how can I write as well as my favorite MCs rhyme. That has always been the push for me. So in terms of like figuring out syllable count, that's happening, but very often it's happening during the editorial process. Especially as of late with how spiritually infused my work is, it's really difficult for me to do that count while composing. What's happening is I'm channeling, the poem is a prayer, and it's happening in real time. And the edit is when I look back through, I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to craft this line? Where is the break going to be? What are the implications in terms of that? If I'm interested in enjambment, where and how many lines should this be? But in terms of syllable count, that's definitely something new, and it's becoming fascinating to me. And 4 years ago, I would be looking at myself now saying, "Who is this guy? I don't know this person. Somebody go get him," because form was not necessarily my jam then, and it's becoming very liberating now to have this idea that I can. This is another way that I can work to control the rhythm. And being a student of form has made me a stronger writer. Like in my spare times to impress my students, in middle and high school, sometimes like I write 16 or 32 bar or 64 bar verses. And in order to do that, I need to make sure that I'm able to master time. That is, I need to make sure that I'm able to fit these words on beat, 4 beats to a measure, which sometimes if you're not even aware of syllable count, but you're aware of your rhythm and your metrics in terms of your words, how hard your consonants are versus soft can really also play in terms of tonality. So these are things I'm starting to think about intentionally. These are things when I was younger that I think I kind of just did and sometimes got really lucky with, or was really fortunate to have that as a part of my skill set. And now I'm thinking about how can I intentionally do the things that I had a multitudinous amount of like happy accidents previously.
Yeah, that's so cool to think about that the sort of the cadence, because I mean, you really do. I feel like hearing you read, there is that incredible cadence that's driving the poem right through the whole thing. And it's beautiful that way. Um, you were talking about like the sort of the play between hard consonants, soft consonants, all that kind of stuff. One of my students named Lucas Hunter. This is just he's kind of wonderful in a way. He says that sometimes he'll sing his poems, but he won't like read them, like say the words. He'll just do the vowel sounds, like it. So it's like ooh ah ooh la da de ya e ah ooh ni. It's all this kind of stuff. It's just like he just wants to hear the vowel sound of it. And sort of that's kind of his own music or the way he puts the poem together or something. It's kind of cool.
That's really incredible that your student does that. I love that a lot. Um, well, I believe if we don't have any more questions from the comment section, I don't have any more questions myself. I don't know if you all have any more questions for each other. Um, if not, I believe we can close out the reading. Um, I want to say thank you so much to everyone at home who has tuned in. Thank you so much for helping us close out our series for the year. We will reconvene in January with the Watershed reading series. If you like this reading, please sure to follow us on all our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at ArtLitLab. We now have a Venmo account, so you can also use the tag ArtLitLab if you'd like to donate, so that way we can continue having a program like this free and open to the public. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good night.